To stream. It's almost ready. Getting ready.
What was it? Second Kings 2?
Second King was 16.
16.
Yes, indeed. All right. Welcome everyone who is joining us both here in Topeka and online for our Torah study this Shabbos morning. And also, happy 4th of July. Uh, Hag Sameach, the Yom HaAtzmaut Amerikai, American Independence Day. We are grateful to be Americans and hope that that condition persists for many years. Okay. We will turn our attention now to the book of Kings, since this is Torah study. We're in chapter 16. Today is where we are starting, and as always, we will start with our blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. If you say amen, you get full credit.
Amen.
We are picking up here in chapter 16. And again, we've been seeing a little bit of the falling down. We have Jerusalem and Judah isn't falling as quickly into chaotic, uprisings and overthrows and coups as the Northern Kingdom. But that condition is starting to shake the foundation of the kingdom of Judah, just like it is doing to the kingdom of Israel. And obviously, we're on the downward slope now, so it's not going to get. I mean, Judah will get one or two more fun, like cool guys, but other than that, we're mostly on the trip down. Okay, so in the 17th year of Pekah, sorry, son of Remaliah, Ahaz, son of King Yotam of Judah, became king. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was pleasing to the Eternal his God, as his forefather David had done, but followed in the ways of the kings of Israel. He even consigned his son to the fire in the abhorrent fashion of the nations that God had dispossessed before the Israelites. Now, remember, we've talked about this before, but we mentioned this, in fact, in a recent class. I don't remember which class we were talking about it in, but that the idea of Gehenna, or the closest thing to Jewish hell that there is, comes from this idea of the Valley of Gehinnom, which is one of the valleys that border the Jerusalem, which is on a hill that's kind of like pointed. And the two valleys meet, and one of them is the Valley of Gehinnom, which is where the Jebusites, who the Canaanites who lived in Jerusalem before David conquered the city, the way they worshiped their God was to pass their children through fire. Does this mean they literally sacrificed a child to their God? Perhaps. We're not exactly. Does it mean it was like a run through? I don't know, some kind of pagan, ritual that doesn't harm or just maims, but maybe the feet get burned. Or I don't know. We're not exactly sure, but we know that God calls this among the acts that were abominations that justified, quite frankly, God's transfer of the land back from them to the Jews. Remember that the Jews lived there, and then the Jews all went down as a family to Egypt, and then were enslaved in Egypt. So in that time, other people came and moved in and lived there. But they were dispossessed, and it wasn't just like they were placeholders, but in fact, they did very wicked things, including this to their children, which, again, served as a partial justification for why it wasn't a bad thing that when we had to go home, we removed them from our home entirely, rather than live alongside them like we would with other people's. So he had consigned his son to the fire, in the abhorrent fashion of the nations that God had dispossessed before the Israelites. He sacrificed and made offerings at the shrines, on the hills, and under every leafy tree. Right? What does that mean?
The poles to Asherah.
Right, everything. It means it's not just, because you might say to me from this, well, doesn't this just mean he loves God? He just wants to okay, we know he's only supposed to sacrifice, and especially he's the king of Judah. They have Jerusalem. You're supposed to sacrifice in the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, we get that. But maybe he just loves God. No, 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 no. Not just to God, to everything. He's doing pagan stuff, trees, foreign gods, all the stuff you're not supposed to do. In verse 5, and again, we're going to start to see, as we've already started to see in the fraying of the relations between Judah and Israel. Judah and Israel find themselves on opposite sides of the Middle Eastern conflicts of the time. So you have Judah allying with Egypt against, again, as Egypt becomes a greater power and Judah becomes a lesser power, Judah becomes more of a orbit state of Egypt. Same thing will begin to happen with Assyria and Israel, or Aram in this point, Aram, Damascus, and Israel. And this will, again, since they are on the border of they essentially become buffer territories for these two larger empires. They end up fighting each other, and eventually the bigger empires say, "What need have we with you having any sovereignty at all?" And so they just take over. Then they turn on the people that they had allied with. That's the situation. So in verse 5, then King Ritzin of Aram, and King Pekah, son of Remaliah of Israel, advanced on Jerusalem for battle. They besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome him. They couldn't conquer Jerusalem. At that time, King Ritzin of Aram recovered Elat for Aram. Elat, sorry, as we know it today. He drove out the Judahites, or I guess we don't want to say Judeans because that's kind of becomes that's more appropriate as a later term for Jews who live in the area in the Second Temple period. So he drove out the Judahites from Elat, and Edomites came to Elat and settled there, as is still the case. So Aram had defeated the Judahites, and Judah at that point had extended all the way down to the Red Sea, to Elat. And this is, again, the beginning of the shrinking of Judah. So they no longer, for a little bit, Aram will control Elat. Eventually, they're basically saying Edomites, or essentially proto-Arab tribes will come in and live there. Right. So, and this is, again, we're going to see these alliances shift. In verse 7, Ahaz, again, sent messengers to King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria to say, I am your servant and your son. Come and deliver me from the hands of the king of Aram and from the hands of the king of Israel, who are attacking me. Right? So he's to the south, he's Judah. Israel and Aram are attacking southward and around, right? Because Aram came down to Elat, so they're trying to pincer them. So he calls out to a bigger empire, a rising empire again at this point, as I said, Assyria, with one of their most, to be fair, there are like six of these guys, six Tiglath. It's like Charles in England. There's a bunch. He's not the first or the second. I think this is actually the third Tiglath-Pileser. But history knows of the Tiglath-Pileser that we're speaking of, king of Assyria, and is one of the kings that brings Assyria back to the fullness of its, probably the fullest power it will ever achieve once it starts falling again, after once Nebuchadnezzar takes over, once Babylon takes over Assyria again, it's kind of done, right? Assyria is kind of done at that point. But this is there, right? We had our moment like 200 years before this, right? We took over even up to Damascus. We were down towards Egypt. We got lots of stuff, but that was our big moment. This is 200 years later, and our power is slightly less, and their power is growing. But the power of Egypt and Babylon over here is also growing. And so as these soon to be much more monstrous in size. I'm not necessarily, though they probably were very backward. I'm not referring to them morally. I'm just saying once these, behemoths start growing to the point where they have armies that are insurmountable by the relatively small, especially divided and opposing each other Jewish kingdoms. You will see in the course of history that there was very little that could be done to overcome this, especially considering the divisions. I'm not saying that if the people were united that they would or wouldn't have survived, as a sovereign state. But in any event, plenty of peoples from this period did not survive as sovereign states, and plenty of peoples from this period were removed off the earth. They just don't exist anymore. So
this is before Persia, Greece, and
way before Persia and Greece. Yeah. So Persia will take over, right? So it goes Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, right? Each one gets succeeding. It's like a Russian nesting doll in revert, right? It's the smallest of the big Middle East, ancient Near Eastern kingdoms is, I'm not counting Egypt, obviously, because Egypt is kind of an African / Middle Eastern, it's its own thing. And to be fair, everyone in the region viewed Egypt's rising up into the area as kind of an intrusion. So, yeah, but of the Middle Eastern kingdoms, it's generally, we're starting now, and it's Assyria, and then Babylonia, and then the Neo-Babylonian Empire, because the first one collapsed in the late Bronze Age. But Neo-Assyrian, Neo-Babylonian empires, because they're reconstituted versions of themselves, and then the Persian Empire, which takes over Babylon, and is in fact totally taken. The history of it is totally recorded in our text, because of course, once Persia defeats Babylonia, and Babylon falls to Persia, the Jews are told by the king of Persia, because Persia has a different ruling system for its empire than the ancient Near Eastern system was at the time. Remember, I've told you before that Assyria and Babylonia will do the very common thing at the time was to take the leadership class of a people and uproot them and move them to a different part of your empire. So that because of a difference in language and culture and economic status, that group would be distrusted and then would not be able to, they would be able to contribute to the empire, but they wouldn't be able to lead a rebellion in their area. So that was the common thing. If you conquered an area, you took the leaders, all the religious and political and economic leaders, and you just moved them. This is where we get, by the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion, right? They carried us away to captivity. That's again, this is this is our remembrance of the carrying off into exile. So in any event, I think it's important to get the historical context of this, because while there's a religious aspect to it, I think you need to be able to see the actual history of the region to understand what's going to happen next. Because once you see that, you go, oh, okay, I see why that happened. Anyway, okay. So here we get Ahaz seeking an alliance, submitting himself, making himself a vassal to Assyria in order for Assyria to rescue him, because he's under siege. And in verse 8, Ahaz took the gold and silver that were on hand in the house of God in the temple and in the treasuries of the royal palace, and sent them as a gift to the king of Assyria. The king of Assyria responded to his request. The king of Assyria marched against Damascus and captured it. He deported its inhabitants to Kir and put Rezin to death. So there you go. So it works. He says, "I'll take your bribe and you'll do what I say." And he comes up from behind them and just swallows Aram and Damascus, and puts the king of Aram to death, and takes, as I was saying, takes the leaders of Aram and deports them to Kir, which was far to the north. It's basically Turkey. It's Kurdish area, really. It's eastern Turkey, northern Syria, western, that up by the Caucasus, on the southern Caucasus almost. Verse 10. When King Ahaz went to Damascus to greet King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria, he saw the altar in Damascus. King Ahaz sent the priest Uriah a sketch of the altar and a detailed plan of its construction. Uh-oh. What is this? What is this about?
We're going to follow in their ways. We're going to become pagan.
Maybe. What else could it be? Okay, let's say it's just straight up. Why though? What would possess him? He just thinks it's pretty, or
He's subservient to Assyria,
okay,
to his gods.
so to show vassalhood, it could be. I also think there's a little bit of it that's just, the Assyrians are so powerful, and we used to be powerful, and maybe again he's a religious relativist, right? He's like, but if that God is powerful, and maybe we got it wrong. Maybe there's a more power. We were just doing this thing. That's it. He's showing he's a religious relativist. He's not he doesn't have one fixed point.
Whatever works.
Right. He's like, yeah, right. I guess maybe this thing is more powerful. It's like putting a new reactor in your put a new V8 instead of a V2 in your car, and you'll punch it, right? So I'm just saying, he's kind of like, let's put a new engine in this temple and see if it gives a extra room to the military and economic power of our country.
Question: were there any prophets that came and told them, "Hey, this is stupid"?
Yeah, but we'll get to that.
All right.
Okay. So, right. So the priest Uriah did just as King Ahaz had instructed him from Damascus. The priest Uriah built the altar before King Ahaz returned from Damascus. So by the time he gets back, there's already one there. And when the king returned from Damascus, and when the king saw the altar, the king drew near the altar and Ve'ya'al, he went up on it, but really that means he what? Making aliyah in this sense is causing the smoke to rise, right? It's not he ascended, but rather he caused an offer. He made an offering, caused an offering, made an
Now, where
offering.
did they put the altar in the temple?
I'm not exactly sure. I assume it's like next. It's remember that the main altar is in the courtyard of the temple, not inside. So this is probably out there somewhere. It's probably there somewhere. No, probably not. But there wouldn't be room in the holy. I mean, the Holy of Holies is a very small room. I mean, like maybe this size, but maybe a little smaller. Actually, probably smaller than this. Probably if you cut the corner off this room, that's probably more akin to the size of the Holy of Holies. It's just not that big. Again, there was only ever one guy supposed to go in there.
That's right.
Right, and only once a year. It didn't need to be the world's biggest room. Although the Mormons do that, I think. They've got their temples are like massive, but they only use them they don't use them all, right? They don't use them for their weekly services and stuff. They use them for life cycle events. So it's like if you're not having one, you don't actually go. Anyway, it's a big space though. This case, we were economical with space. Very small since we didn't need it that often. Easier to air condition. Sorry, that was a bad joke since there definitely wasn't air conditioning. Okay. So verse 13, and he offered his burnt offering and grain offering. He poured his libation, and he dashed the blood of his offering of well-being against the altar. Um, this is interesting, right? I mean, he's doing the traditional kind of, it's like going into a church and praying the Amidah. And it's like, okay, you did a Jewish thing in a not Jewish space, right? I don't mean to say that because it's worse than that, because this is a sacrifice to another god, but but only because that is the altar. His way was very Jewish, is all I mean. He did a burnt offering and a grain offering. He did a libation. He poured out the wine in the thing. He did the dashing of the blood, like we did, like he did the thing, but he seems to have done it, yeah, just on this Assyrian again. Like he's like, oh, we'll just do our thing, but must be a more powerful altar design or something. Even worse, it's like changing the design on your race car, not even the engine. It's just like changing like the design of the plastic or whatever it is. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the other thing, the other altar, verse 14. As for the bronze altar that had been before God, he moved it from its place in front of the temple, between the new altar and the temple, and placed it on the north side of the new altar. So the new altar was positioned at the forefront of the temple courtyard, between the old altar and the sanctuary. Elsewhere, though, our commentators tell us that it's recorded that Ahaz closed the doors of the sanctuary, cut its vessels into pieces, and offered sacrifices to foreign gods. So the commentators have much harsher, believe he was a much worse guy than I think the text even, because you might believe, I think they really say that because you might believe, like I said, that he was trying to do a Jewish thing in a non-Jewish way. And they're trying to tell you I think that's not the case. He was just trying to do a not Jewish thing. That could be an exaggeration just to get across that point. Yeah.
To gain the power of the Assyrians.
Yeah, the power and favor, right? Like if you switch to somebody, if you show that you're worshiping like other people, they're going to be like, whoa, cool, right? Like you guys must be like that's great. So like there's a little bit of that where it's like, how do we show that I mean, to be fair, we do this today, right? I'm a huge pro-Israel guy. I'm a big AIPAC guy. I know AIPAC gets a lot of bad press these days, but I'm really into that. But what is the number one argument? It's not about money and it's not about aid. And the number one argument is a shared values argument. In this case, it's not about religion because America, at least nominally, is not a religious country. Instead, we're appealing to the modern version of that. We're saying, look, Israel is a country like America that shares America's values and pushes American values in a region where no one else believes in them. All of that is true, but it's a vassal argument. Part of the reason it's funny, talking about Israel since we're going into that, part of the reason it's funny that some voices now are insisting we cut off all funding to Israel's offense and maybe even defensive capabilities. The only people in Israel who agree with that are actually the far right. Because they feel for 2 decades at least now, if not since Operation Nickelgrass in the Nixon administration in 73, 73, that Israel would have been free to pursue its own agendas in the Middle East and also to win wars that otherwise Washington says when you must stop. Why? Because to be fair, Washington provides arms and Washington provides diplomatic cover at the UN. Again, America provides these things. We provide them for Israel, and so Israel does what we say. What's that called?
Vassal.
Being a vassal, being a controlled country of another nation, of an empire. Essentially, Israel is a vassal of the American empire, which is also why it's often called our greatest ally. Because who's a greater ally than a country that's totally dependent on you? A country that can pursue its own aims might, in the world of real politics, geopolitics, betray you. But a country that depends on you totally, a vassal, will never betray you. So we like vassals. Well, we as Americans like vassals because we're the empire. Israelis, especially right-wing ones that want the ability to pursue their own military and foreign policy, and I don't necessarily agree with them. I'm just saying this is a perspective in Israel, have long said that Israel should refuse American aid and investments in their military because it would allow them to chart their own course and pursue different arrangements. Whereas right now, there's no deal that could ever be made with any other country not aligned with America. Because again, Israel is an American vassal.
I'm certainly not a
Yeah.
right-wing Israeli.
Sure, yeah, no. You're not Itamar Ben-Gvir, I don't think so,
Okay.
yeah.
But I like the fact that Netanyahu was saying, we will do what we have to do in Lebanon. Trump, you don't control us.
Oh, do you really believe any of that? Do you really believe that?
Yes.
Then you're, Lauren, then I have no hope of of him losing the election in 2 months then. If even you believe that, no. As he said in numerous cabinet meetings, if Donald Trump calls and says, turn back the planes turn back. That's the rule. That's the rule. That's always been the rule since 73. If America says no, it doesn't happen. And in fact, one of the biggest betrayals I see as an American who's also pro-Israel and obviously a Jew and a rabbi is that so often in this, because Donald Trump talks out of both sides of his mouth, happy birthday, America, because of that, he'll give Bibi a green light, and then when Turkey and Qatar get mad about the strike in Lebanon, he'll say, oh, the IDF shouldn't have done that. But he gave them, they wouldn't have done it if he didn't say go. So again, I'm telling you, if you believe that, that's not even meant for you when you believed it. Shame. Sorry, right? But shame. That was a domestic message meant to soothe his right-wing base, to say, oh, we'll definitely do stuff if we have to. But actually, we've really stopped basically all strikes. You know, we're down from like 20 strikes in Lebanon a week to 1.
Yeah.
So looks like the vassal did what the vassal was supposed to do. This is important, quite frankly, on two completely radically different fronts. As an American, I don't mind having a vassal, but I do wish that Israel would find a way to restore its sovereignty, because this is a story about what happens when when Israel subjects itself to being a vassal, and then the empire abandons you.
Yes.
Which we, quite frankly, have already seen the beginning of with the Memorandum of Understanding with Iran, in which Trump, not liking his prospects for the election in November because of gas prices, because of the war, decided to surrender to Iran to restore economic stability. And in order to surrender to Iran, he kind of had to, blame, be like, oh, well, the Israelis, and we did stuff, but we'll restrain them. And it's bad. It makes it look like Israel's our attack dog, which doesn't help with the general feeling about Israel in the world. So, but again, Bibi doesn't have any friends, and he doesn't even have in this country. He can't even turn to the other political party because he alienated them a decade ago. So, I thought it would be really funny actually if I suggested that Hakeem Jeffries should invite if the Democrats win. They obviously would do this, but if the Democrats won the chamber back in November, then in January, Hakeem Jeffries should invite Bibi Netanyahu to speak against the Memorandum of Understanding, like John Boehner invited Bibi to speak to Congress about Obama's 2015 JCPOA. And I just thought that would be a funny reversal of like, now Bibi works for the Democrats and he's right? Because it's fun to talk about Jews controlling stuff. People love to do. It's like talking about aliens and whatever. It's just the conspiracy theory du jour.
You mean aliens don't control?
Aliens control the Jews?
No,
I'm just joking. Right. That's the chain. It's the aliens to the Jews to the American. It's hard to keep track of these days. Who controls who? But of course, the whole point is, yes, it's entirely nonsense. And part of my saying this to you is so you understand very much that the vassal arrangement only goes one way, and you're going to see this happen here. The vassal arrangement only ever goes one way. That's still true today. Israel doesn't in any way control America. America entirely controls Israel. Anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you something, and it's probably Jew hatred. Because that's the oldest trick in the book. Oh, the Jews control XYZ. Okay, so he moved the altar, and we're in verse 15 now. King Ahaz commanded the priest Uriah on the great altar, in other words, the new big one that we just made. You shall offer the morning burnt offering and the evening grain offering and the king's burnt offering and his grain offering, with the burnt offerings of all the people of the land, their grain offerings and their libations. And against it you shall dash the blood of all the burnt offerings and all of the blood of the sacrifices. And I will decide about the bronze altar. Right? So he's saying, in other words, he's saying, the bronze altar in a way is going to become, the old altar is going to become a private altar for me to use when I feel like it. But the regular stuff will all be done on the new altar.
We also have here a complete inversion of what was originally set out, where it's the high priest who tells the king what will happen religiously.
Yeah, that's true.
That. Yeah.
That's true. Here we've seen that, right, political, right? It's a good lesson to take that somehow the political system can overwhelm everything. And so the kind of reverence that other nations show their kings has infected the Israelite kingdoms. And so they see the king as the highest authority and not God. And so Uriah did just as King Ahaz commanded. King Ahaz cut off the insets, the laver stands. So he cut off the panels of the trolleys, and he removed the laver from upon each of them. He also removed the tank from the bronze oxen that supported it and set it on a stone pavement. So, in other words, it suggested perhaps he was going to use melt down the bronze for bribes.
That's the Bronze Sea, isn't it?
What?
Isn't the tank that Solomon made the Bronze Sea? How they put it on oxen and
Yeah, it's like a block. It's like a holding block thing.
Some places that refer to it.
Yeah, I don't know that name, but that doesn't mean that it's not that. It could be that name, and I just don't know.
Obviously, an English translation.
Right? Yeah. So it says he removed all that stuff on account of the king of Assyria. He also extended to the temple the Sabbath awning, which was for the priests to use as a resting place on Shabbat, that had been built in the palace and the king's outer entrance. Okay, so it's saying he directed it so that he could go straight from his house to the temple, which is apparently a personal security design. Perhaps it's suggested because it's just on account of the king of Assyria. Perhaps we think that Ahaz did this because he saw, again, the king of Assyria was living temporarily in Damascus after he conquered it. So that's where Ahaz went to visit him. So perhaps he saw that the king of Assyria had different ways of protecting himself, different ways of making sure he was not subject to being, right? Because kings in Israel and Judah have been assassinated recently. So perhaps he's learned not just new religious ways, but he's learned new just kingly ways from seeing how a more effective king does it. He's imitating the Assyrian king in everything. He's imitating religion. He's imitating personal act. He's imitating, how he does security and how private he is, right? He's got to have his own private altar, his own private access to the temple. It means if he needs to see no one ever, he can. It makes it possible. It makes it more possible anyway, which is much more secure. Yeah.
Did he build an underground ballroom?
An underground ballroom.
With a golden statue.
Why would the ballroom be underground? I assumed it was supposed to be above ground. Maybe there's an underground room in case of nuclear attack or something.
There is that.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to talk about that, then like I'm all for talking about that. But to be fair, we spend a lot more maintaining Mount Weather, which is you all know what Mount Weather is.
No.
Mount Weather is the underground facility in the mountains near Washington, D.C., where Congress decamps to in the event of a nuclear attack. We still pay for its maintenance. We have since the 50s.
No, that's weird.
Nobody cares, by the way. Not a single person cares. Just for the record, none of you care, right? Okay.
Didn't even know of it.
Ballroom's good then. We're
We
done.
don't.
I don't really care one way or the other. He could do it or not do it. It doesn't matter to me. But the people, like, it's like there are so many bigger things happening in this country. Anyone who talks about that, but not the socialist who thinks that firebombing Jews isn't anti-Semitic in Colorado, I just have no patience for that. It's like ballrooms. That's what we're talking about. Ballrooms. No patience for that. There's the bigger fish to fry. And I say we fry them. And then we can, once we have fried them all, then we can go to the ballroom and celebrate with all the fish.
Eat
Okay.
them.
If only. Anyway. Okay. So again, he did all these things. Okay. Verse 19. The other events of Ahaz's reign and his actions are recorded in the annals of the kings of Judah. Ahaz rested with his ancestors and was buried with his ancestors in Ir David, the city of David. His son Hezekiah succeeded him as king. Yeah, right. Yeah, everyone knows Hezekiah's name. We heard that and we go, hey, Hezekiah, the second to last good king we get. Second to last good king we get. So we should certainly right, Chizkiyahu. We should certainly be very happy about that. Okay, so but going back in time just a tiny. Does anyone have any questions about? Does anyone want to talk about Ahaz? I did a lot of talking about Ahaz, but I don't know.
How long did the vassalage with?
Until the end.
Really?
We're not all that far from the end
No,
of the Northern Kingdom
course.
at this point. So until the end. And by the way, it'll be kind of the same thing with Judah eventually, and then in the end. Nebuchadnezzar will come down and finish off Jerusalem. Sadly.
Am I remembering right that, and as you say, we're not far from it, but the Assyrians come in, that's the end of the Northern Kingdom and the 10 lost tribes. But did they not try to come down to Jerusalem too, and they were repelled, or?
Well, again, remember, Judah and Israel are not allies at this point. They may worship the same God, but even then, slightly nominally. The king and priesthood in Israel is kind of disinterested in the Israelite religion, and the people pretty much do whatever they want. They're essentially I don't want to say a pluralist society because I'm a pluralist, and I don't think they were, but they're essentially a non-unified society at this point, which makes them very easy pickings.
But Judah's, as you're pointing out, a vassal to Assyria.
Yeah.
You would think that Assyria would conquest Israel and say,
They do.
They do, but don't they also come down and try and attack
Assyria? No. Assyria doesn't try and take over Judah, I don't think.
I thought it did. Okay.
Maybe later. Again, to be fair, these alliances shift. Because at one point, Judah betrays Assyria. I think what you're referring to later, when the conflict starts with that, Judah betrays Assyria to ally with Egypt. And then later, Judah will do that again against Babylon, and that's the last straw. Which is Judah will say, okay, we'll be Babylon comes to them. It's the same thing with Assyria, but Babylon will come to them also and say, you have to be our vassal or else we'll conquer you. And they say, okay. And then Egypt comes and says, hey, how about you get your sovereignty back and we team up and fight Babylon or Assyria first. And they keep falling for it. And they go, yeah, let's do it. And then Egypt is like, actually, we're not that interested. And so then it's just Judah against a much big, and then it's not good. So yeah, they make some really bad political decisions. So that's Ahaz. Again, from his perspective, he saved the kingdom. They were besieged. by Israel and the Assyrians.
Yeah.
And he saved them. At what cost? We'll see. But from his perspective, I'm sure he died thinking he did good. Although we don't think so, clearly. But we have vision. Okay, chapter 17. In the 12th year of King Ahaz of Judah, Hoshea, son of Elah, became king over Israel in Samaria for 9 years. He did what was displeasing to God, though not as much as the kings of Israel who preceded him. Right? And now we get another Assyrian king, Shalmaneser. King Shalmaneser marched against him, and Hoshea became his vassal and paid him tribute. Right? Because again, they're the vassal of Assyria. The other ones are, then they're gonna, well, we'll see. We'll get to that in a second. Right? So Shalmaneser marched against him, and Hoshea became his vassal and paid him tribute. Right? And Shalmaneser, these are part of his campaigns that went all the way to Egypt. At one point. So again, Israel and Judah aren't the whole, you could go around them technically, because at this point, I don't think they control the shore of the Mediterranean. But so just so they don't have to conquer to go through there. But it's a big campaign. Verse 4, but the king of Assyria caught Hoshea in an act of treachery. Here we go. He had sent envoys to King So of Egypt, and he had not paid the tribute to the king of Assyria as in previous years. And the king of Assyria arrested him and put him in prison. Right? Then the king of Assyria marched against the whole land. He came to Samaria and besieged it for 3 years. Right? And that's the commentator notes, but I want to note too, it's pretty surprising. A city in a small kingdom without a king held out for 3 years. That's pretty good. But, it's not going to last. I mean, nothing lasts forever. But in the 9th year of Hoshea, again, 9th year, how long did he reign? Just that long. In the 9th year of king of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. He deported the Israelites to Assyria and settled them in Hala, at the river Havor, in Halav, by the river Havor, at the river Gozan, in the towns of Media, in the cities of Media. And again, Media is kind of like Iran, Western Iran. There's one of the Persian empires is called the Median Empire.
Yeah.
So it's right. So they were put as far away as they could be they're brought from the north of Israel across Assyria to its northernmost easternmost border, basically along that sea, whatever that sea is, is it the Caspian Sea? I don't know, where Iran and Azerbaijan and all those countries share water over there. That's basically where they sent the leaders of Israel. Again, this is what they do. We've talked about this. And then verse 7, we got to get an explanation. Again, this is the defeat. This is the defeat. I must tell you, we're here. It's happening. This happened. Verse 7. Vayhi ki chatu v'nei Yisrael Adonai Eloheim. This happened. This was really Vayhi. This was because the Israelites chatu sinned against Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, sinned against Ladonai Eloheim, the eternal their God, who had freed them from the land of Egypt, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. But they worshipped other gods and followed the customs of the nations that God had dispossessed before the Israelites, and the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced. Right? And that means they practiced in defiance of the law of the Torah. The Israelites committed against the eternal their God acts that were not right. In other words, they ascribed matters that were not so to God. That's what it means actually to there's an idea of taking God's name in vain. I know in this country that usually means just don't use God's name in things. That's not actually the Jewish idea of taking God's name in vain. This is the Jewish idea of taking God's name in vain, is saying, ah, yes, God loves when you cook burgers over coal. Does the Torah say that anywhere? No. It's that simple. You just have to ascribe to God something God never said. That's taking God's name in vain.
Okay.
Not saying, oh, God. That's not the same thing.
It's going against the Torah.
It's not just going against the Torah. If you go against the Torah, that would be me saying, I'm going to cook this pork here. I'm going against the Torah because the Torah says don't eat pork. But I'm not saying the Torah says we can eat pork. That would be right. That would be, first of all, that would be literal. You would be killed for that. That goes further. That goes further. But like, if you say God really wants us to eat all kinds of things, the Torah, that would be taking God's name in vain, because God doesn't say you should eat all kinds of everything. God says Jews have very particular things that they're supposed to eat, and it's one thing for you not to do it, but it's another thing for you to lie and say it is okay that God says so. Don't say God says things that God doesn't say. That's the very simple way to not take God's name in vain in the Jewish sense.
This is what Christianity did. Peter came and said all foods were permissible except for those sacrificed to idols. And
interesting.
And because he had a vision of
no, but why does he care if the food was sacrificed to idols?
Well, because they wanted some rules, but not very many.
Oh.
And you couldn't do strangle animals or take blood, or sacrifice to
you
idols.
Still can't eat blood? I don't know Christian dietary laws. I assume they didn't have any.
I think they could eat it with blood. They certainly did.
I have no idea.
I wasn't sure. That would be very fascinating if they're a Christian. If maybe just I know Catholics have certain rules, especially during Lent and different things. They do and don't eat different foods. No meat on Fridays. I know.
Well, I know it was in response.
I think
to Paul.
Maybe I don't really know. I'm really bad at. I'm.
Paul was converting Gentiles, and Peter and Paul were trying to come to something.
Meet in the middle.
In the middle,
yeah.
No circumcision, and you could, and
that was a big winner. That was a big winner. The no circumcision.
Yeah, it was.
If you were picking between Judaism and Christianity, that would certainly be a big weighing factor for a lot of people.
And then all foods were acceptable except those sacrificed to idols.
You said Peter said that, or Paul said that?
Peter said that because it was essentially saying, "Hey, Peter and Paul were together on this one." There were a lot of.
I don't know. Again, I don't know. It's all Greek to me.
I read that stuff for.
No, sure, I get it. I mean, it's interesting. I just don't know anything about it.
Therefore, that would be good grounds for Christians to say, "Hey," for Jews to say, "Hey, these Christians aren't us."
Well, yeah, certainly rejecting those things in that way would make it hard. Yeah. Okay. So, so that's what they did. They built for themselves shrines in all their settlements, from watchtowers to fortified cities. So even from little, just outposts where they're just protection outposts on borders and stuff, to the cities, right? It's saying they didn't completely denounce their loyalty to the God of Israel. They didn't say we're not Jews. We're not, we don't have the God of Israel. But they chose to be kind of, again, this is where, is it pluralist? It might be more polytheist, and that just being the problem. They're not saying, they're kind of saying all gods are gods, which is not what Jews say. So they chose not to cleave exclusively to the God of Israel, worshiping foreign gods at the same time. Verse 10, they set up pillars and sacred posts for themselves on every lofty hill and under every leafy tree. So they did pagan rituals, and they offered sacrifices there at all the shrines, like the nations whom God had driven into exile before them. They committed wicked acts to provoke God's anger. And they worshipped fetishes concerning which God had said to them. Fetishes are just idols, essentially. And they worshipped them as concerning which God had said to them, you must not do this thing. right? In this case, right, fetishes are just idols, and they worshipped idols, and God had specifically said to them, "Ta'asu et davar hazeh." Don't do this specific thing. You cannot worship idols, and they did it anyway, right? Even though it's a fundamental commandment that appears many times in the Torah. There's some commandments in the Torah where you say, "Oh, mother's milk. Maybe are we gonna boil in a mother? Oh, this. What does it mean? What does it mean?" There was no ambiguity about this command in the Torah. No Jew has ever come along and said, "I'm not sure if God thinks I should worship other gods or not." There's no question about that, right?
Even images do.
Right?
That's
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, right? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Anyway, so right, and so they were told not to do this, and God had warned. This is like a legal disclaimer we're getting, saying you might read about this whole thing and the downfall of the kingdom of Israel and think, does this mean that this book doesn't have any, this is the people losing, being defeated. Why would God allow this to happen? And so it's giving you the disclaimer saying, look, this now the thing some other religions don't get exactly is that this is not an abrogation of the covenant between God and the people of Israel. This is fulfillment of the covenant between Israel and the God of Israel. And that's what it's trying to tell you here. It's trying to tell you in this disclaimer, God said that if you went too far, you would endure a period of exile. That's part of the covenant. We will get prophets who relate to us so that we understand in fullness that that is not meant to be permanent. It is meant to help shape the Jewish people so that when we return to sovereignty, we will be prepared for our task. Since in this case, we clearly were not ready to fulfill our task in this age. But the covenant is unbroken. Some people will come along and say, well, the Jews' loss of sovereignty and failure to accomplish their mission in their first go-around is proof that the Jews are disfavored by God and their covenant is broken, which I think is funny because none of the religions who say that made their utopia on the first go-around either. As we know, Muslims are still trying to conquer the world, though they only got through North Africa. And Christians are waiting for the second coming of their Messiah, which will then bring about the time of peace and justice, etc., that the Hebrew prophets spoke of. We'll see. Anyway, so this is the disclaimer, and it's like, so God warned Israel by God, verse 13, God warned Israel and Judah by every prophet and every seer, saying, turn back from your, and we'll get this when we get to the books of the prophets. At this point, we're not really getting stories about the prophets. The book is trying to wrap up the story, and then we're going to get the books of the prophets, and they're going to go into this, what they're talking about here. But it says, right, they said, turn back from your wicked ways and observe my commandments and my laws, according to all the Torah that I commanded your ancestors and that I transmitted to you through my servants, the prophets. But they did not obey. They stiffened their necks like their ancestors who did not have faith in the eternal their God, referencing the Jews that left Egypt but were unable to enter the promised land because they were not able to shed to be obedient and shed that mindset. They spurned God's laws and the covenant that that had been made with their ancestors and the warnings they had been given. They went after delusion and were deluded. They imitated the nations that were about them, which God had forbidden them to emulate. They rejected all the commandments of the eternal their God. They made molten idols for themselves, 2 calves, and they made a sacred post, and they bowed down to all the host of heaven, and they worshipped Baal. Again, it's just giving you, it's heartbreak, just boom, boom. It's like, it's trying to show you that God wasn't being harsh. God had endless patience here, but At some point, you are not helping anything by refusing to punish
Sure.
wrongdoing. And God said that there would be punishment for this. And so even though God loves the children of Israel and wants them to succeed, God realizes that just letting them do whatever they want isn't going to help. They must be corrected. If they are unwilling to do teshuvah, repentance on their own, if they were, by the way, that you'll see with the kings of southern, a couple of them are willing to do some teshuvah, are willing to try and set things right. And God is very happy with them. If only, we say on Yom Kippur, God waits and waits for the sinner to turn back. Even to the last moment of their life, God prays for them to return. The point here is that at any time the Israelites could have avoided this. At any time we can make things better. But they refused. They thought they were deluded. They convinced themselves that this was the right way to be. Yeah, that's about it. They worship Baal. And worse, 17, they consigned their sons and daughters to the fire. They practiced augury, spells and divination, and gave themselves over to what was displeasing to God and provoked anger. God was incensed at Israel and banished them from the divine presence. None was left but the tribe of Judah alone. Nor did Judah keep the commandments of the eternal their God. They followed the customs that Israel had practiced. So God spurned all the offspring of Israel and afflicted them and delivered them into the hands of plunderers, and finally cast them out from the divine presence. For Israel broke away from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam son of Nebat king. Sorry to stop in the middle of the verse, but who made Jeroboam son of Nebat king? It was just at the beginning of this book. God. God's prophet anointed Jeroboam king of Israel, if you remember. So it's kind of, this part is a little, the argument would be, well, God did what was necessary to enact, what would happen, but in any event. It caused them to commit great sin, verse 22, and all the Israelites persisted in all the sins that Jeroboam had committed. They did not depart from them. In the end, God removed Israel from the divine presence, as they had been warned through all God's servants, the prophets. So the Israelites were deported from their land to Assyria, as is still the case at the time of the writing of this book. Right? And again, the commentator will say, although some remnants of the people, they didn't take every Israelite. They just took the leaders, right? So it made it so that Israel, as a specific, unique political entity, was exiled from its home. All its religious, economic, and political leaders were exiled. Not the farmers and the merchant, those people stayed. And they brought probably leaders from other places to live in Samaria, right? Oh, here we go. Sorry, he's going to say this here in the next verse. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Kuta. So that's, Kuta, from Ava and from Hamat and from Sepharvaim, which I don't know all these places, but areas under Assyrian rule. And he settled them in the towns of Samaria in place of the Israelites, and they took possession of Samaria and dwelt in its towns.
Historically, we think this is 721 before the Common Era?
728, 726, something like that.
In that ball.
Yeah, something like that. Right. So they bring those people, and when those people first settled there, they did not worship God. So God sent lions against them that killed some of them. At that time, lions lived in the land of Israel. They said to the king of Assyria, the nations that you deported and resettled in the towns of Samaria do not know the rules of the God of the land. Therefore, that God has let lions loose against them that are killing them. For they do not know the rules of the God of that land. the king of Assyria gave an order. Send there one of the priests whom you have deported. Let him go and dwell there, and let him teach the practices of the God of the land. Yeah, some of you know what's happening now. So one of the priests whom they had exiled from Samaria came and settled in Beit El. He taught them how to worship God. Right? But we're told that it can be assumed that the former priests of Samaria were hardly the best examples of proper religious behavior. And they probably taught the new inhabitants the flawed practices that had been customary in the kingdom of Israel before its destruction. So this is probably bad. They're learning bad Judaism here. However, each nation continued to make its own gods and to set them up in the cult places that had been made by the people of Samaria. Each nation set them up in the towns in which it lived. And so this is all happening in Samaria. Thank you. It is all happening in Samaria. So the people of Babylon from Babylon made Sukkot Benot. The inhabitants from Kut made Nergal. The inhabitants from Hamat made Ashima. Right, one of all their idols. Right. And the Avites made Nibhaz and Tartak. And the Sepharvites burned their children as offerings to Adra Melech and Ana Melech, the gods of the Sepharvaim. They worshipped God, but they also appointed from their own ranks priests of their shrines, who officiated for them in the cult places. Right? So the Israelite priest was the leader of their Israelite religious practices, but they had their own priests for their own stuff. They worshipped God while serving their own gods according to the practices of the nations from which they had been deported. To this day, they follow their former practices. They do not worship God properly. They do not follow the laws and practices, the teaching and instruction. So in this case, Torah mitzvah. So they don't follow the Torah or the mitzvot that God enjoined upon the descendants of Jacob, who was given the name Israel. Right? So they're not good, even though they look like they do some of our stuff. Having made a covenant with the children of Israel and commanding them, you shall worship no other gods. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, nor sacrifice to them. Very clear, extremely clear. Man, how long is this? Almost there. You must worship only the eternal your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt with great might and with an outstretched arm, from the Haggadah. To whom alone shall you bow down, and to whom alone you shall sacrifice. You shall observe faithfully all your days, all the laws and the practices, the Torah and mitzvot that I wrote down for you. Do not worship other gods. Do not forget the covenant that I made with you. Do not worship other gods. Worship only the eternal your God, and you will be saved from the hands of all your enemies. But they did not obey. They continued their former practices, the nations that had been brought to Israel. Those nations worshipped God, but also served their idols. To this day, their children and their children's children do as their ancestors did. And 1 second, we thank you everyone who's joining us online. We appreciate